All right, guys, so today is going to be the Vivek show because Vivek has pissed off everybody, right? Everybody hates Vivek, even Fox News, okay? Because Vivek says the quiet part out loud, and he's been doing that in basically every single GOP debate, exposing neocons and corrupt politicians. Now, last night at the GOP debate, as we all know, he exposed Nikki Haley and Chris Christie as the foreign policy idiots that they are, okay? Because we've had years of failed neocon foreign policy that has resulted in nothing but American lives being lost, trillions of dollars being spent, added to our debt, and just embarrassments on the world stage as, again, our foreign policy always seems to backfire in the long run. I mean, just take a look at what happened in Afghanistan and how, we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq at the same time, right, to take out the Taliban and fight the war on terror. Just for 20 years later, again, trillions of dollars spent, the Taliban takes back over the country. Just a pure embarrassing moment for the United States and our foreign policy, which, again, has been an absolute disaster. Now, although this has been a disaster for the American people and for the American brand on the world stage, it's been a success. It's been great for the corporate interest and the military industrial complex that benefits from the trillions of dollars that we spend to fight these wars, which is why we continue to make these same policy mistakes over and over and over again, because it's not really a mistake, it's actually intentional, right? And the reason why you know this is because every time there's an attempt to question our obviously failed and terrible foreign policy, you're always met with backlash and vitriol and pushback for simply questioning the establishment narrative. And the people that are responsible for the failed foreign policy are never questioned on the wisdom of continuing the failed foreign policy. And that is what I want to talk about here today, as Fox and Friends host Brian Kilmeade gets in an argument with Vivek Ramaswamy after the GOP debate on Vivek's foreign policy in regards to Ukraine. And this exchange right here, again, tells you everything you need to know about the establishment and how they only want to push one narrative, especially when it comes to foreign policy, because they will never, ever, ever question Nikki Haley the same way that they're questioning Vivek Ramaswamy on foreign policy, even though Nikki Haley's foreign policy has proven to be an absolute disaster. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and react to this because, again, this tells you everything you need to know about the establishment.
But the problem, I just like to know, when this policy, it's just ridiculous on Russia and Ukraine. He says, tell Russia basically they can have Ukraine if they promise not to have an alliance with China. I mean, if there's... can we hear us now? Hey, Vivek.
I can hear.
Vivek, are you comfortable? Are you comfortable with Russia taking as much as Ukraine as they want? Are you comfortable pulling all our aid out? And do you really believe that Vladimir Putin will agree not to have an alliance with China?
I think we have to play hardball there and make a hard deal that requires any reneging on that deal to have major consequences.
Like what? Like sanctions, like we have right now?
Well, look, I think that we have to be able to have real consequences. Maximum pressure campaign. We have sanctions. We don't have a maximum pressure campaign. And I can go into the details of that, and I have at the Nixon Library and elsewhere. But what I'm saying, Brian, is the clear principles are this war doesn't advance U.S. interests.
Yes, it does.
Russia-China alliance is the top threat that we face.
If you give up Eastern Europe, we'll be in a world war.
If I may ask you a question.
Right.
You asked the question, I want to make sure I answer it.
I'm just going to answer you. It is in our interest.
Detailed contours of a deal. I think it is not in our interest to strengthen the Russia-China alliance, and I think our policy right now is driving Russia further into China's arms.
It's going to be done anyway. You cannot keep Russia from China.
I think Russia is going... I think the answer is we are driving Russia into China's hands. There are kinks in the armor of that relationship. Look at Russia sending weapons to India and to Vietnam after other meetings they've had. This is our opportunity. Nixon did this in 1972, and Brian, respectfully, people like you said the same thing, that Nixon couldn't do it. Well, it takes an outsider who's skeptical of that establishment. That's going to be me.
I was 7 years old.
But we can both, you and I are both students of history, and I trust you to know that.
Yeah, so here's what you guys understand. I don't have a problem with Brian Kilmeade questioning Vivek on his foreign policy, right? That's not the issue. okay? Because I think that everybody should be questioned. My issue is that you will never see this level of scrutiny when it comes to the failed neocon / neoliberal foreign policy in regards to Ukraine, right? Okay, because again, this guy, Brian Kilmeade, says, well, we can't keep Russia and China from working together, right? And, being in a closer alliance or a stronger alliance. Okay, so if you believe that, then what makes you think that we can keep Ukraine from Russia, right? Because according to the reports, the reason why that the U.S. is basically moving towards a peace agreement now, right, or trying to broker some type of peace agreement is because the writings on the wall in regards to the war. It's basically been a stalemate, okay? Those 3 regions that Nikki Haley can't name, right, in Ukraine, okay, I mean, effectively, those regions have been taken over by Russia, right? And we don't have any proof or evidence that continuing to fund the war is actually going to help Ukraine get those regions back. So again, what evidence does Brian Kilmeade have to suggest that we can keep Ukraine from Russia? Again, he'll never ask that question. He will never ask that question. But Vivek was right. Okay, Vivek was right about, hey, we're going to have to come to a peace agreement here, right? We're going to have to realize that the writing's on the wall, what can and can't be done, and we're going to have to come to a peace agreement, and lo and behold, that is what they're trying to move towards now, right? So, again, Vivek has been proven to be right on his foreign policy, and the neocons have been proven to be wrong, that they've been lying to us about what's actually going on in Ukraine. But again, people like Brian Kilmeade, he'll never scrutinize the establishment powers that be. Again, people like Nikki Haley on continuing to fund a war in which we don't have any real defined end goal or plan in regards to how the war is supposed to end, how we're supposed to get to peace. It's amazing. In this country, the liberal media, the legacy media, will question a peace plan more than they will question a war plan with no peace. It blows my mind. And see, here's the thing. I don't want people to get confused because some people think that America first means abandoning our allies. No, America first does not mean abandoning our allies. I think in some situations, it makes sense to fund a foreign conflict if we have clear, defined goals in regards to how this protects American interests and how we're going to come to peace, right? The problem with neocon foreign policy is the fact that we jump into these wars with no clear, defined plan in regards to what we're there to accomplish and how we're going to get to peace. And this is why the disaster that happened in Afghanistan happened, because we didn't have a plan. They just jumped in and said, hey, we're just going to topple the Taliban and we'll take care of it in regards to what happens after that, right? We'll see. Same thing with Iraq. You topple Saddam Hussein, had no plan for how they were going to fill that vacuum of power, and then you had to deal with ISIS. And Trump has to come and deal with and clean up ISIS, right? It happens every single time we do this. We jump into these foreign policy conflicts with no real defined plan, no real goals for how we're going to achieve peace, what we're there to do, and then it ends up escalating and getting out of control and becoming something that we didn't intend on it becoming because we didn't have a plan in the first place. But instead of actually, again, asking these questions, right, in regards to what is the plan, what is the end goal, what is the truth about what's going on there, are taxpayer dollars being used efficiently for what they're supposed to be used for? No, you never get that questioning. You never get that scrutiny. You never get that type of scrutiny. It's always scrutiny of peace. Always scrutiny of peace. And that's what pisses me off about these people. Again, I don't care about questioning Vivek and his foreign policy. I think he should be questioned. But you should question Chris Christie, question Nikki Haley, question Joe Biden, question any of the neocons and the neoliberals on their foreign policy that is proven to be a disaster. Give them the same type of smoke. Give them the same type of smoke. But again, it'll never happen.
You comfortable giving up Eastern Europe? Because you know they're already taking Moldova, already making moves on the Baltic already. They're taking more and more pieces of Georgia.
Tell you what I'm not comfortable
and all
with.
we've done is sit there and send blankets and MREs, and we got an invasion. So what is going to be next?
Because we have no idea how Ukraine has spent $200 billion of our money. We're forking over more taxpayer money.
Do you see how they fight? These guys are the best fighters in the.
And I'm not going to stand for that.
Ukrainians are probably the best fighters in the world.
Ukraine is not some democracy.
Ukraine is fighting for their sovereignty. And they were invaded. They would have invaded.
Reported, Ukraine has actually assassinated a former presidential candidate from 2019.
So
but the
naive.
media doesn't like to report that.
So naive.
Well,
you just give up Ukraine, and then in a few years you'll be criticizing Joe Biden for giving up Ukraine.
You know, again, it's amazing. He says Vivek sounds naive, but again, this is the same guy with no evidence whatsoever, right? He is basically suggesting that we should continue to fund a war in which, admittedly, okay, by the mainstream liberal media, they admitted we have not made any progress. Ukraine is not winning, right? It's a stalemate. And that's probably the best case scenario. That's just what they're telling you. So, again, is Brian Kilmeade naive to believe that we can continue to fund this and that somehow the outcome is going to change when Russia is a global military superpower and Ukraine isn't? Because Brian Kilmeade has the ability to ask, well, what comes next when it comes to Vivek and his foreign policy? But when it comes to the NEOCON foreign policy, for whatever reason, he doesn't ask that same question. But let's ask that same question, right? What comes next? What comes next when we decide that, you know what, we're going to continue to fund this no matter what? Let's say that the goal is to, I don't know, take back those 3 regions that have basically already been taken over by Russia. Okay, so how do we do that? If Ukraine continues to run out of fighters, who gonna fight? Well, you know who about to fight. American troops are gonna fight. American troops are gonna be on the ground. That's what comes next. But they'll never ask that question, right? And the reason why is, like I told you guys, the problem with neocon foreign policy is that they never think through any of these things. They don't ask what's next. They say, well, let's fund the war now. Let's invade a country now, and then we'll ask questions later about what happens next. And then it always ends up in a disaster every single time because of this type of thinking right here, right? The naive person is Brian Kilmeade for thinking that this won't end the same way that all of our foreign policy disasters have ended, right? That's the naive thinking in this conversation, right?
Respectfully, we can respectfully, Brian, I think that if I called Nikki Haley naive, you guys would be having a conniption. Let's be honest about that. But you want to call me naive? I actually understand what the heck I'm talking about here. Really? Nixon did this in '72. We can actually split up the Russia-China alliance
and what
advance
happened,
American interests
I think
and protect
World
our
War
own
II
homeland.
is your better example.
I think it is offensive.
World War II is your better example. One is a diplomatic approach and one is an active war.
Germany. If you could have split up Japan and Germany, then I do think that you actually have a good example of World War II.
You were going to convince Hitler not to go with a fascist nation?
And I'm not talking about convincing anybody, Brian, but the fact of the matter is I think it is offensive that people would sooner use $200 billion of our resources to protect some other nation's foreign border that's not a democracy, when in fact we're not even doing that effectively.
You can do both. It's not either or.
We're doing neither.
It's neither. It's not either or.
And that's the fact of the matter. And I think this neocon wisdom needs to be relegated to the dustbins of history where it
wisdom. No one buys into that. Just give up Eastern Europe. Just give up Eastern Europe. Why not?
And Afghanistan, look at those results. The same people that took it to Iraq and Afghanistan are trying to do this again in Ukraine, and it's already been a disaster. Time for the neocons to admit it.
Not one soldier is there. Not one American soldier is there.
Something they have done. Well, Lloyd Austin just threatened earlier this week that we are going to send our troops unless we pass that aid package, actually. So, Brian, you mark my words. Listen to Lloyd Austin, who's advancing the same policies as Nikki Haley.
He's saying he's going to send troops if they move it to a NATO nation, not to Ukraine. Pay attention.
He expressly said that it's going to require sending troops if we don't actually pass
we have to
the
go.
Ukraine aid.
He said if they take a NATO nation.
Boneheaded foreign policy. And I think that the hard answer is that we need to protect Americans. That's the answer.
Thank you so much for joining the program.
Amazing. Again, I want you guys to understand, my issue is not criticism of Vivek's foreign policy. I think his foreign policy should be criticized. My criticism is the fact that these people do not have the same smoke for neocon foreign policy that is proven to be a failure, right? I do think that there's something to be said about the idea that, okay, well, you could just pull Russia and China apart, okay? I think that we should ask more questions about how can that be done, what it looks like. I have no issues with that, right? But what I have an issue with is when you have smoke for something that's different, but you have no smoke for something that has had a history of failure over and over and over again. And in a few years, people like Brian Kilmeade will be acting like it's a shock and surprise that this did not end up the way that it was supposed to end up. Again, these are the same type of people in the media that when the Iraq war was happening, people that came out and was like, no, we're against the war. We don't think that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. They were censored. You were censored. You were smeared as, I don't know, pro-terrorist or whatever, right? This is what they were saying. This is what they're saying. And then to come to find out, 20 years later or so, whatever, we find out, well, yeah, I mean, Saddam didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, that the invasion of Iraq was a mistake, that we should not have went into that country. We should not have toppled Saddam Hussein. But again, if you were saying that at the time, you were smeared. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're a bad guy. You're anti-American. You don't know anything about foreign policy. You're a foreign policy novice. And that's just simply not the case. Again, I personally, think that all policy should be criticized. I just don't like the fact that they never have this same level of scrutiny for the NEOCON foreign policy. And that's what really bothers me about this. The fact that this guy felt the need to come up here and to defend foreign policy that has failed time and time again, okay? While at the same time criticizing the guy that's simply calling for peace, right? A peace plan that looks to be what is going to be the peace plan that we ultimately are going to have to work out with Russia, considering how things are. Again, it blows my mind, right? It really does. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.